All right, hello everyone. What we're going to do is we'll walk through on how to do the HIPP. Okay, this will help you in the long run in how to get points on your DBQ. And so basically what we'd like you for you to be able to do in the fullness of time is to be able to look at a source and sort of mentally do a HIPP in your head. And if you can do these things in your head, then you will know how to use a document to get the maximum amount of points in the DBQ. For a DBQ, it's not just about using the documents to support your argument, but it's also about being able to look at these points of a document and use these points as well to support an argument. And over time, we're going to talk more about how to do that. So when you look at a source, the first thing you want to do is summarize it in your own words. And this could be a sentence or two, okay? Not anything more than that necessarily. Okay. So when you look at the historical situation, this is where things get a little bit more intense. So the historical situation. When you want historical situation, what you do is you look at two things. You look at the name of the person or the author or the speaker. You should know Christopher Columbus. But if you didn't know who this person was, you're not going to know everyone that you get as a document. You look at the time for 1492, and then you can kind of understand what else is happening around that time of 1492. So looking at this date of 1492, we got to ask a larger question. What's happening in the world? What's happening in the United States? What's happening in Europe or anywhere else in the world, just in general? You want a very broad, big picture of what's going on. Okay, so the key here is being able to place it in historical narrative. There's a story happening in 1492, and this document is part of the story. In order to understand this document, though, you need to know the larger story of the time. So when you think of the time 1492, what you should be thinking about is the age of discovery. During this time, Europe was in the age of discovery. Okay. And you might want to say a little bit about what that is. Europeans were getting on boats and going around the world in order to do what, right? The more you have read and kept up with the content of the course, the more you will have this kind of thing in your mind when you see the document, okay? The more you'll have this in mind when you see the document. So this is really about your background knowledge of the situation at the time of the document, at the time the document was produced. So in this situation, the greater historical context is the European age of discovery, when they're going around on boats trying to find stuff. What were they doing? They were doing a couple things. One is trade. They were trying to expand trade networks to Europe, trying to get around the Middle East and trying to get directly to places like India and China without having to go through all these intermediaries in the Middle East and on the Silk Road. So that was the larger context. And also especially for Spaniards, there was a major interest in converting people to Christianity, okay, during this time as well. When you know that larger story, you can see elements of that larger story in the document. And that's really what we want you to be able to do to get the full DBQ points, is to know a larger story that's happening at a time and connect the document to that larger story. Okay. And so in this box here, you're going to put a couple of sentences describing that larger story that's happening now. And the more you can identify the right larger story to connect to the document, the better off you will be. Okay, so let's take a look at attended audience. So Christopher Columbus is the writer. Who do you think he's writing for? Okay, that's the question you want to ask with intended audience. What's he doing this for? What's he writing? Well, you can see it says log here. That's sort of like a diary of the ship. Every day on the voyage, he says what happens. So a log could be for many different reasons. You could write one. You got to kind of guess what Christopher Columbus is trying to do. And I will leave this for you to figure out and sort of write in there, but you sort of take a guess. Do you think he's writing this log just for himself and his own records? Do you think that Christopher Columbus knows that other people will read this kind of thing? If he knows that other people will read this kind of thing, how do you think he will present himself? Okay. So the intended audience and the purpose kind of flow into each other. So if he was intending for other people to read this, maybe the king and queen, maybe just, in general, he thought that this thing would get out. Why do you think he's writing this the way he's writing it? Okay. What do you think Christopher Columbus wants to do with this log? What does he want um, people to understand about what he's writing? Okay. And so this is where, you have an audience and you have a purpose in things that you want to tell them. And so you're going to use words that will sort of convey your message, what you want them to take away from it. So in other words, you're trying to further a goal when you write something like this, perhaps. Okay. So what do you think his purpose was? And you got to kind of read between the lines. This is where your analytical skills come in. Okay. So that's intended audience and that's purpose. And then when you look at point of view of the author, again, you're not always going to know who the author is. And so when you think about point of view of the author, that's also where historical context comes in. But with Christopher Columbus, maybe you do know a bit about the author. So if you happen to know a lot about the author, you can explain that here. The other thing that you want to consider is where is the author coming from? What is his own personal historical background? How does the historical time affect what the author is trying to say? Okay. So this is kind of where you take the point of view of the author and the historical situation. You're kind of seeing how they interact with each other. Christopher Columbus is writing during the Age of Discovery. And this is the time when Europeans are going around for trading purposes and also for the purposes of exporting Christianity and converting people to Christianity. That being the case, where do you see that here? What point of view is he giving here? Is Christopher Columbus giving the Christianity point of view? Is Christopher Columbus giving the point of view of somebody who just wants to trade? Is he doing both? Is he doing one more than the other? That's kind of what we want to talk about with the point of view of the author. All right. And so so what can we learn about Christopher Columbus from reading this thing? This historical situation that you see here is something that Christopher Columbus kind of knows about. So how is he affected by the historical situation? That's another thing that you can put there. Many different things that you could put in there. But what you're basically trying to do is figure out how the history of where this person is helping to shape this person's point of view. Okay. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about here. And then you can also talk a little bit about intentions. I mean, you look at Christopher Columbus, he wants people to read this, or he expects that people will read this, and he's sort of highlighting the Christianity part. It would be strange, perhaps, if somebody said, I just went abroad because I wanted to make a lot of money. Like that was my purpose is I want to make a lot of money. Even if that's true, you probably wouldn't put it that way. You'd probably emphasize perhaps some of the other aspects of what's going on there. So you see even you got to kind of read between the lines and see if there's any sort of hidden intent or purpose or point of view that the author wants to hide, perhaps. Okay. So that's another way of thinking about it. And another thing you could do is kind of go into the point of view of Columbus when it comes to his view of Christianity, and how that view of Christianity is how it views, for example, Native Americans. When you look here, it says they can be made free and converted to our holy faith more by love than by force. Well, made free suggests that they're not free now. So you can explore Christopher Columbus's point of view on what Christianity is and how he views people who aren't Christians and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways you can go in this point of view portion, and a lot of that will be determined by whatever question you're answering on the DBQ. The larger point being that if you can do this in your head eventually, and if you can use what you've gotten in your head on a DBQ to advance an argument, you're in a position to get all of the points for the DBQ. And that's kind of what we're going for. So for now, just try your hand at filling this out. Having taken into consideration the things I've said, we will do more HIPPs as we go along. But this was just a sort of first crack at it in case you've never seen this particular document before. Good luck.